Hi, I'm Jonathan, and I'm very privileged to be speaking this morning, or this afternoon actually, since this is an afternoon sermon, too used to the other. And I want to give a sermon that is part of a series I've done and love to do called Building Up the Church, and it's from the book of Nehemiah. I love the Old Testament, I teach Old Testament, and I love the book of Nehemiah. One of the things that's fun about the book of Nehemiah is a lot of people don't know this guy very well, and he's an interesting guy. It was an official of Israel. He was an Israelite who was an official in the kingdom of Persia, and he helped rebuild the walls. That's what he did. He built the walls of Jerusalem. But part of what's fascinating to me about the story of Nehemiah is that in all the history of the Old Testament, different parts, I think, speak to us at different times in where the church is at and where we are in our life. You know, obviously sometimes this is just real obvious. When you're depressed, you read Job, or, you know, when you're really happy, you read a psalm, or kids' stories usually come from the book of Genesis. You get Noah and the ark, or Jacob wrestling the angel. But I think that in a bigger sense, we as a church kind of identify with Israel, and we think about different stages in Israel's history in terms of kind of where we're going to find ourselves. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm going to guess that if you're over the age of about 30 or 40, you have heard a lot of sermons that are based on the monarchy. Because for some reason, Christians found themselves in this world where they were going to try to figure out how we are going to handle the power we have. Now I'm thinking about American Christians, right? I'm thinking maybe of white middle-class American Christians, people who can vote, people who can choose governments, people who had presidents who prayed more or less to the same God in the same name as the one that they worshiped in their church, right? Rather than some different president who worshiped some other God. I think one of the funny things that came out several years ago when Obama was running for election and being elected is that there was this huge hissy fit over whether he was a Muslim or a Christian. Well, first, you know, you got to take people's word for it on what religion they are. I would hate for someone to tell me I was something other than what I thought I was. But second, as some of my Muslim friends in America said, what would be the problem if he was a Muslim? Which starts you thinking, what kind of country really are we? Do we expect our leaders to be Christian? And do we expect somehow our country as a country, or the powers in town, in state, or just in the community, whatever it might be, to have the values of Christianity? Now, I want to be fair to these people who are preaching all these sermons. They weren't claiming that the America was perfect. In fact, half the time they were preaching sermons from the monarchy about how unfaithful the kings were, right? How David sinned. And so we're trying to hold each other to account, but we're still assuming, hey, we're a Christian nation. Most people under about 30 just laugh at that notion, by the way. The idea of Christian nation, they just don't even know what it means. I was reading in the paper the other day the story about the Wiccan church coming up in town, and what struck me in reading that is not that there are a lot of Wiccans. By the way, Wiccans are, as best I can tell, witches. You know, they worship nature in some way, and they will identify themselves as witches. It's not that America is mostly made of witches, but it's that in the news story, it seemed like for the most part, America really can't tell the difference between Wiccans and Christians. Like, they're just people doing funny religious things, and it doesn't really matter what the name is on the building. Muslim, Wiccan, Christian, who cares? We're in a new place. Pluralism, secularism, call it what you want. And in this new place, I love to read the stories, not of the monarchy, but of this Jewish community that is struggling to put itself back together when the kingship has been lost, when the temple has been destroyed, they've been taken into exile, and now they're coming back, but they're not really sure what they're coming back to. Now, in some ways, the coming back itself was super exciting. And those are sermons that maybe you'd hear in some African American churches. Those were Exodus sermons, right? The exciting sermons. Woohoo! We are going back. We are being saved. We are not slaves anymore. We have our freedom. God is moving to set us free. But by the time of Nehemiah, God had set them free about 100 years ago, and not much had happened since. The walls were still burned. The temple was still run down. They were still under the authority of pagan kings. And as far as they could tell, nothing was happening. And in some ways, what fascinates me about the book of Nehemiah, along with other ones at the time, Ezra, Esther, is that they help us figure out how are we going to live in these strange times? And how are we going not just to survive, not just make it, but build something, create something, do something as a community? And that's, I think, really hard for young people at our time to really even be able to imagine. Our concept of Christianity is that we'll maybe survive, we'll try not to die out, we'll meet in some living rooms, we'll say some prayers, but the idea of building things, of starting institutions, of creating new endeavors, of starting a new program, of reaching new people, of growing, it's foreign to a lot of people. And so I want to turn to Nehemiah 1, and there's, in the first verses, some talk about the historical setting. In the month of Kislev in the 20th year, when I was in Susa, the capital city, it happened that one of my brothers, Hananiah, arrived with some others from Judah, and I asked them about Jerusalem and about the Jews, the families still remaining of those who survived the captivity. They told me that those still remaining in the province who had survived the captivity were facing great trouble and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem was broken down, and the gates had been destroyed by fire. When I heard this news, I sat down and wept. I mourned for some days, fasting and praying to the God of heaven. There's a power in Nehemiah's reaction. It's fascinating to me to realize that for 100 years, the walls of Jerusalem had been broken down. For 100 years, the gates had been destroyed by fire. For 100 years, the people in the provinces were facing great trouble and reproach. And yet, at this moment, hearing it, something breaks in Nehemiah, and he begins to weep, and he fasts, and he prays. And it's from that place of fasting and praying that God is able to begin a rebuilding process. I want to suggest to you that our rebuilding, our creating something, no longer is going to come from a place of saying everything's so fine and wonderful and we're going to reach the whole world by the year 2000, which I don't know if you heard that, but I heard that a lot leading up to the year 2000. By the way, it passed, and it's not happened. Or did you know, since we're Restoration Movement people, did you know what the first Restoration Movement journal was called? The Millennial Harbinger. We're going to bring in the millennium. We're going to restore the church. We're going to make everyone united. And Alexander Campbell had these little charts where he showed, okay, if we convert these people, and if these people come back, then the whole church can become united, and then we can reach the whole world. We've got to stop, and we've got to say, we're broken. We tried to unite the church, and instead we broke into 3 different groups. We tried to restore the pattern of the New Testament. Instead, we came up with more things to argue about. And the one thing we can be pretty sure about the pattern of the New Testament is that the apostles weren't very happy with people arguing with each other. There's a problem going on. And facing the truth about our troubles. And again, not just in the church, but in the world. Being able to say, you know what, the violence that's going on, the divorce that's going on, the brokenness that's going on in our world, it's a church problem. Because God's instrument for bringing healing and hope to the world, at least in a significant part, is the church. I'm basing this on Ephesians now, kind of moving away from Nehemiah, but Ephesians talks about how God is bringing all things in heaven and on earth together under one head, even Christ, who is the fullness of everything, and for the sake of the church, his body. That somehow his body, the church, is demonstrating to the powers in the heavenly realm what God has in store for the whole cosmos. And this can sound triumphalistic. Oh, we're so great, we're so important. But in fact, it's terrifying. I think of in the Brothers Karamazov, there's this old holy abbot who's a saint in the book, and one of the things he will do when he meets a prisoner who has been condemned for murder is he will say, "I'm so sorry, because if I had only shown my light the way God intended me to shine my light, perhaps you would not have committed that murder." And I think that in a sense, the church can say that to anyone in our society who's on drugs or who is confused or is going astray in ridiculous and strange ways. We can say, you know what, we're so sorry. If only we had shown our light the way God intended us to shine our light, this world would have been a place in which you could have been different. And so the first step in Nehemiah is saying something's broken, something's wrong. And maybe it's been wrong for decades, maybe it's been wrong for 100 years, but it's still wrong. And by the way, I think just to talk about American Christians, we probably need to drop the idea that the wrongness is just, let's get back a few decades and everything will be right again. Because a few decades ago, when maybe divorce was lower, racism was worse. Let's drop the notion that there was just some moment. This has been going on. The walls are torn down. There's a problem. One of my favorite sermons I've heard was on James, the book of James, and the way he describes Scripture as a mirror. And maybe I liked this because I'm the sort of person who will look in the mirror and see that I need to comb my hair and then walk off and forget and never comb my hair. But whatever the case, what's fascinating about this is that we have this tendency to think, I am okay. In fact, I'd call that one of those irresponsible lies that keeps us from ever doing anything. I am okay, things are going well, the church is okay, the world is okay. And by the way, most statistics show divorce is as high within the church as without, that premarital sex is almost as high within the church as without, that from cheating, lying, pornography to abortion, it's all going on as though the message of Jesus Christ means nothing. Not to mention the legalistic arrogance in which maybe we're a little bit worse than those who are not Christians. What are we to do about the walls that are broken down? And how are we going to help ourselves care? How are we going to help ourselves care again? Is it weeping? Is it fasting? Is it times of mourning together? We are so easily apathetic, so easily uncaring. We hear of a tragedy here and a person starving there and a problem there. And it's very difficult for us to get upset. The second irresponsible lie, if the first one's that everything's okay, the second irresponsible lie is that we don't have to get all upset about it. People tell you, don't get upset about it. Don't try to do anything. Let's just work it out. Let's just keep on an even keel. And in some ways, that takes us away from that place of action, because action begins with caring, with crying, with fasting, with mourning. Action begins with people who say, this has been bothering me, and it's been bothering me for weeks, and it's been bothering me for months, and now I'm at a place to do something. Most people remember John 11:35, the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. But it's a profound verse too, that Jesus cared. His action to help his friend and raise him from the dead came from a place of caring, from crying. Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Paul says, beside everything else, I face the pressure of my concern for the churches. If anyone's weak, I am weak. If anyone's led into sin, I inwardly burn. Paul, Nehemiah, Jesus, these people cried when they saw how broken down things were. And Nehemiah, in the next few verses, listen to his prayer as he's fasting, as he's mourning, as he's weeping. This was my prayer, O Lord God of heaven, O great and terrible God, who faithfully keeps covenant with those who love you and observe your commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear my humble prayer, which I make to you day and night on behalf of your servants, the sons of Israel. I confess the sins which we Israelites have all committed against you, of which I and my father's house are also guilty. We have wronged you. We have not observed the commandments, statutes, and rules which you enjoined on your servant Moses. Remember what you impressed upon him in these words. If you are unfaithful, I'll disperse you among the nations. But if you return to me and observe my commandments and fulfill them, I will gather your children who have been scattered to the ends of the earth and will bring them home to the place which I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed with your great might and your strong hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to my humble prayer and the prayer of your servants who delight to revere your name. Grant me good success this day. So Nehemiah is confessing. It's easy to say that the church out there is a broken down church. The Catholics, the Baptists, the people who are divided, the legalists. The third irresponsible lie is that it's not my fault, that somehow it doesn't have to do with me. And it's so, so hard. It's so, so hard to say, man, I made a mess of things. The very thing I was trying hardest to do, the one person I was trying hardest to get along with, I can't get along with. And now we have a broken place in our family. The very thing that I could at least be honest and kind to someone, I wasn't honest and I wasn't kind. And now we have a place of distrust where they may never trust me again, and it's my fault. That God somehow can't count on us. Psalm 51 says, against you only have I sinned. Nehemiah says, we've acted very wickedly toward you. It's funny how much we blame, we point to others. It's so hard to take that place. And yet it is, I think, the place for Christians, where Christians can move, where we are uniquely prepared to move because we have these long traditions of confession, because we have a gospel that says something like, Jesus came to forgive sinners of whom I am the worst, and this is the gospel I preach. Because of our scripture and because of our gospel, because of our worship, because of our weekly communion, which says, I am not worthy and I'm going to take this bread and this cup. We have the resources to step into this place. When I was in school, we had a student who was an elderly student. She was not quite right in the head. She stank. She dressed funny. No one wanted to be around her. For the most part, no one was around her very much. And it wasn't terribly surprising when we heard one day through a newspaper article, we kind of wondered, hey, we haven't seen her in class for a while, that she had committed suicide. And what was fascinating is that this newspaper story was full of people in the mental health profession and people in the welfare profession and people in different professions, and they were all saying, it's not our fault. Because she had been to mental health people, she had called the police, she had been in and out of the hospital, and they were all saying, well, it's not our fault that she ended up committing suicide. And it was in our worshiping community that I heard people say, it was our fault. We are Christians, and we knew this woman was lonely, and we did not do what we could have done. We did not shine our light. We did not visit the person who was hungry for human touch. We are the goats. It's from that place that action came. It's from that place that we were able to begin to rebuild. If you blame others, you cannot do a thing to change. If it's somebody else's fault, that's outside of your circle of control. But in a place where as a community, when you say, the reason things aren't working is because I'm not praying, I'm not fasting, I'm not obeying, I blew it, I confess, we are then in the place to take action. Well, my next sermons in this series will follow the actions of Nehemiah. He was an organizer, he was a planner, he brought people together. But I want, before I leave chapter 1, I want to let you know that one of the things that drives what Nehemiah does as he's working with pagan people and getting them to fund his project, as he's bringing together lots of different groups and of Israelites and getting them to stop doing what they've been doing for the last 100 years and to start working to build together, the final thing that he shows in his prayer when he calls out and he remembers the promise of God is he begins to hope that God will act. And I do believe that this hope that God will act is the final thing we need to prepare us for action. If we're going to rebuild, if we're going to change things, if we're going to start a program, if we're going to make a difference, if we're going to say, you know what, homelessness or children not getting a good education or whatever it is, we're going to change that. It begins with some sense that God is going to act. Hope is an act of confidence that allows us to do things. I'm not an optimist. I'm the type who turns off the radio when the Cowboys are losing in the fourth quarter because I know they're not going to turn it around. I'm not stupid. I know when I see a sinking ship, I want to get away from that sinking ship. But there is a power available in the promises of God. And that's what Nehemiah appeals to in his prayer. It is what all of the people who've ever done anything that I know have appealed to at some level in their life of saying, I may not be much, but there is a power of God available in his promises. And with that hope, people have started colleges, have started missions, have started orphanages. They've gone and stepped out and tried to do something. Half the time they failed, half the time they succeeded. The world is littered with people whose lives were changed and transformed by things that didn't last very long, that didn't accomplish everything they hoped they would accomplish. But God is constantly at work. And Nehemiah rebuilt those walls. Jerusalem did not become a utopia. But he is able to stand before God and says, you said if we return to you, things will get better, and I will take an act. I will take a step. I will choose something, and I will do it. And in Nehemiah 1:11, he steps off to meet the king and ask for permission to go and to take an action to rebuild.